Welcome back to the channel, folks, and to our hopefully comprehensive guide on how to paint the Spearhead Force, which is the starter army for the Bulge American releases. Now, I've already painted the infantry for these and posted a tutorial for them. That's the paras, and there'll be a link to that at the end of the video. So keep an eye out for that or check the playlist. This video is going to be concentrating on the many different kinds of vehicles you can see here. And the main focus is going to be on one approach to faded olive drab. Now, there are various colours and shades of olive drab in front of you here, but it's the, let me see, if you look at the Shermans, the Calliopes, Easy 8s, that's the olive drab that I'll be concentrating on. So I'll be showing you the airbrushing, sort of briefly covering highlighting and chipping and weathering and everything. There's quite a lot there, so I want you to see some of everything, but it's not going to be going into extreme detail because that would be an extremely long video. But you will be able to see more detail on pin washing and weathering in my other videos, and also in particular the pin washing and weathering that I'm doing with these guys is using a acrylic product, a new acrylic pin wash product. I'm going to have a separate video using these vehicles that they'll be posted in the very near future, so keep your eye out for that, hit the bell button, and you definitely won't miss it. So there's a lot to get on with here, folks, so let's first of all have a quick look at construction. I'm not going to show you the construction because once again that would take a lot of time, but what I would say, it's very important that you look at the starter guide here and make sure that you're selecting the right options. There are so many options for these guys, especially for the standard M4 tank, hull and turret. There are so many different barrels, you know, with 76 with the muzzle brake, without the muzzle brake, the different cupolas, the different mantlets for the guns, so many different things. And because you get so many things, you can, as I have done for instance, make, with the Calliopes you can make the 76mm turret that comes with that sprue, so you've got the option of fielding these as Calliopes or as 76mm M4 A3s. And the Calliope launcher itself, you can cut the support that rests on the barrel, you can cut that off, that's soft plastic, and rest the front support, the elevating support, on the plastic barrel, and that's what I have done. I'll just try to bring this over. Or you can stick with the soft plastic barrel itself. I glued the bottom launchers onto the top. These side supports fit in very nice and tight into the launchers, and then I used a bit of blue tack to hold this, when it was all glued, hold it on the back of the turret so I could get the side supports in position and glued, as well as this front support in position and glued. I've not done that on camera, folks, because it was quite fiddly, so be patient and do some dry fitting when you're ready to mount it on the turret, and that'll keep you straight. But folks, read this, understand it. You don't want to live with the eternal shame of having the wrong piece on your lovely painted tanks. I'll be using Vallejo paints with a dedicated airbrush thinner here, folks. I'm going to be mixing them in a separate bottle because I've got quite a bit of mixing to do. I'm not going to do it in the cup. The main colour that I'm going to be using again and again is brown violet, but I'm going to be adding various other colours to that to get the tones that I want. Now, this is not an airbrushing tutorial. I've guessed how much paint I need to do this, and I'm doing roughly a 50-50 split of thinner and paint. Any more detail on that, folks, will probably need a whole tutorial in itself, but there's lots of airbrushing tutorials out there. Now, I'm adding flat earth at this point. I would say I'm probably adding about maybe 1:5 ratio of flat earth to brown violet. And you can see I'm just dolloping it in doing it by sight. It's not a precise process that I'm following. And then I'm going to start mixing this all up. There's a bit of a close-up for you. So I'm going to use a stick to mix this, and you can see it's looking quite runny. You're looking for a nice thin, easy flowing consistency, quite often described as being the consistency of milk. The way I look at it is, when I've finished stirring it, I look at the stirring stick, and if the paint's flowing off it and it's semi-opaque on the end of the stick, the top end of the stick, so to speak, not the bottom end where it's dripping off, then I know it's got a good flow. It's got a nice little sort of dollop of paint ready just to flow off the end there. So let's have a closer look. That's what I'm after, folks. It's not thick on the mixing stick. It's ready to flow off, therefore ready to flow through the nozzle on the airbrush. So let's get our first coat on. Effectively, this is the shade coat. Now, you've got to be patient here, folks. I'm going to put on an absolute minimum of 2 coats. That's how thin this paint is. And in some cases, I maybe even be putting on 3 coats, depending once again on how the mix has gone. Now, give it a chance to dry between each spray. And you can also speed that up just by pointing the airbrush at the surface and just let air blow over it. I quite often do that, and carefully move around. When it comes to things like the wheels and the tracks, I'll be wanting to use little short bursts to get in and around all those deep features from one side to the other side without overdoing it and drowning, which is quite easy done, drowning the features with too much paint. Be careful. Having got that shade coat on, we're now ready to mix up what's going to be the main colour. So using the thinner again in a cleaned mixing bottle, we're going to take our brown violet and put in roughly a 50-50 split. I'm going to bear in mind at this point that I'm going to be adding a little bit of the lightning colour. In this case it's going to be old wood, as you'll see. So I don't want to make the paint too thick. I'm using Panzerace's old wood here because it's going to give a lighter tone to the brown violet, but it's still in the same kind of spectrum as the shade colour, which was a brown. So it's not going to contrast too much with that, so we can get a nice transition. And its yellowish tinge as well is also good in itself as a highlight for a greenish kind of colour. So once again, mix it up in the same way, making sure by viewing the mixing stick that we've got the right consistency in the mixing pot. So now we need to be a bit more careful when we're airbrushing this main coat on. We want to be hitting the top of panels, leaving maybe just about 1/3 roughly of the shade colour on there at the bottom of the panel. And I would be putting more coats on towards the top than towards the bottom of this main colour, this band of main colour, because that way you'll get a more opaque finish on the top edge, which we want to be brighter, and a little bit of a softer transition between the bottom of this band of main colour and the shade that we want to maintain. Now we'll spray it on in a way, as you can see here, where I'm hitting that top edge so that overspray flies away. You know, it's not going to land on the surface, and that's the easiest way without resorting to any kind of masking. That's the easiest and quickest way of doing this process. You can do masking, folks. That can give you really sharp pronounced lines, but it takes a lot of work, and I'm not necessarily after that really sharp airbrush look, because there's other ways I can get that. So you can see me working the same approach across other panels, but the ones that are kind of just on the flat areas, I've got to be very careful and not have any overshooting or overspraying. I'm not using an expensive airbrush to do this as well, folks. I'll leave it to your own discretion on how much you want to spend on your airbrush and on your compressor, but spending a lot of money is not the key to a good outcome. It's knowing how to use the paint, how to mix the paint, and how to use the airbrush. That's the key, and you'll get that with experience. That's not something you can buy. You yourself will know what you want to do in terms of expenditure, but I highly recommend that you start off with something cheaper, build up your experience and skills, and then you'll know where you can invest your valuable hobby time and hobby cash in terms of equipment. For the highlight colour, I'm just going to be using what's left of the main colour and add some more old wood to it. Mix it up just as before. You may need to add a bit more thinner to it at this point because you've been doing a lot of spraying. The thicker paint will sunk to the bottom, so you may have to add a bit more thinner just to make sure you're going to get this coming out nice and controlled. And now we have to be very careful. We just want to be catching the very top edge of panels here. Hatches, for instance, just on those hatches, not on the surrounding areas. Once again, very tricky on flat areas like the engine deck. So you've got to be patient. If you've got your airbrush set up right and your paint mixed right, you will have the level of control that you need to achieve this, even with a basic 2-action airbrush such as I'm using here. Well, one other point, I would not use this highlight on the bogies, on the wheels, on the running gear. That's going to be quite dark, and we want to leave it quite dark so that we can weather it down with dust effects and mud effects. So very careful, just catching those lines, accentuating the shape of the flat panels along the back, and that way we're putting on effective pre-shading and pre-highlighting. Having reviewed what I'd done to this point, I decided I wanted to lighten it a bit more. It probably wasn't necessary when I considered what I was still going to be doing in the way of highlighting by brush, but if you want to do this, you can do what I've done here and add a little bit of Iraqi sand to the existing mix. Once again, if it needs a bit more thinner, add that at this point to keep things flowing. Then it's back to some more careful airbrushing. Hopefully you can see that nice, soft, light to dark patina that we're creating here. Let's see that on the jumbo turret. This is quite an interesting turret to airbrush because it's got a big thick mantlet. It's got that large sloping panel to the front before you've got the flat roof. So we'll just work around hitting those edges. You can see the edge with when the overspray shooting past the top of the turret there. And along the front, this is where we have to be careful. I just want to catch that edge. You could put a bit of masking down there if you wanted, folks, but you know, sometimes we're in a hurry, and you go just clearing the airbrush a bit there. We're in a hurry, so let's just be careful and spray it on accurately. Hit those hatches, the outside top edge, and then maybe just a few lighter areas on that flat surface of the turret top. Now on to the pin wash. Previously I would use an enamel pin wash, but I'm now using this MIG Ammo product. It is a acrylic pin wash, which is so much better than enamel that I'm quite dumbfounded, and I will be putting out a more detailed video on this shortly. But you can see how easy it is just to hit these panel lines or little features, little tie downs, hooks and such likes on the, in this case, the turret, and the paint is just flowing around it. Oh, I should point out though, that's after a coat of clear varnish, clear gloss varnish. You need that smooth surface to get the capillary action that's required to draw this thin paint along panel lines and around details. You've got a lot of time to tidy up the pin wash, but I normally do it quite quick. after it's been applied, just let it dry a bit so that you can then remove any wash that's lying on the flat areas. Drop back into the recessed areas or draw it off completely. And as this is acrylic, I can do this with water. No smelly thinners required here. Follow the same process on the hull here. Bit of tissue paper to remove any excess pigment that's hanging onto that brush. And don't forget, you can add a bit more pin wash in if you feel you don't have a bold enough shadow. After just a little bit of drying time on the pin wash, we can move on to the tracks, which I start by giving a coat of US olive drab. It's a nice earthy kind of colour. Now these 8 tracks are quite complex. They've got rubber and metal. So I'm going to do a dry brush, metallic dry brush over the edges where the metal is visible, and then I'm going to paint in the rubber. In this case I'm going to use dark grey, a different colour from what I use on the tyres, which is dark rubber, Panzerac's dark rubber, and that way we're setting up some nice contrasts. It's not just going to be a grey or a greyish area, if you see what I mean. And you can see the tracks there. The dark rubber is quite a light colour, which will show it sort of weathered down. The tyres, as you can see, painting there, starting with the rims and then moving on to the main body of the wheels. And there'll be a tidy up required at the end of this, folks, before you start weathering things down. But it's a long, tedious process doing these, folks. Not my favourite, but worth it in the long run, because it really separates the lower from the upper tank. Now to the stowage. Now there's a lot of stowage comes with a starter set across all the different sprues. So what I recommend is you gather all those sprues together and then split the stowage between the vehicles as you see fit, because they cross over very nicely. You don't have to use that bit of stowage because it came with that sprue. You move them around, and then you can also add stowage using green stuff, and have a very simple process for that, folks. Now I'm not going to go into that in any great detail. This is more just about the painting, and I paint the stowage in the same way as I paint my figurines. And just have a look at the playlist to see how I build the layers up, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm using complementary colours and sort of soft and weathered kind of colours, soft and weathered kind of greens, nothing too bright, nothing too saturated, and just adding some nice distinctive highlights on there that will make it stand out from the hull without going overboard. But our chores are not yet finished, folks. After we've done all that stowage, we also have to do all the tools, the spades and the spanners and the whatnots that are all over these things. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, folks. Check the description below for the colours I've used. Just remember to be careful with the final highlight of London Grey on the metallic areas. Don't make it too strong. It's just to be a sort of bright, eye-catching metallic edge as opposed to a main dominating kind of colour. But once again, folks, be patient. Do a platoon at a time. Don't try to do the tools across the whole box set in one go, because this will really help bring the vehicle to life. And you can see here I'm painting the wooden strip that's been placed, the wooden plank that's been placed across the front of the tank to hold some stowage. Starting to look used and lived in now, which is a great addition to the finished look. And the cupolas on these things are quite dramatic with these vision blocks, so I've taken a bit of time to paint these in. I've used a light blue and then a very light blue, a quick tidy up round the edges, and you get a nice distinctive look that isn't too strong or overpowering. I use scratching and chipping as part of the highlighting process, but I always start with the simple highlighting, which is edge highlighting and just bouncing it along what I call the open edges. and I don't necessarily hit the entire edge. It doesn't have to be a solid line. And then once I've done that, I can start to highlight individual things such as hatches and hinges and vision slits, all the little details that are going to help just pop and catch your eye. And I should point out, we do this before the detailing stage. I've not recorded it in that or edited it in that way, but I would do this before the detailing stage. It just makes the edge highlighting a little bit easier. And then once I've got all the little scratches in place, once again folks, patient, don't do too much. I will then use German Camo black brown to fill in the core of these little scratches, and that is to represent exposed metal that has rusted. And you can see a lot more on this on other videos folks. I'm not focusing on it too much here, but the whole idea is it helps create that patina that we're after, that brings the whole surface together but not in a uniform kind of way. I'm going to be adding another sort of semi-opaque layer here, once again to build up the patina, and that is through fading. I'm going to be using the highlight colour, which is green grey, and I will be adding a little bit of paint retarder, drying retarder to it, and then drawing it down. You've got to be very careful with this process folks. It's very easy to overdo it, and you just want to be putting on very small amounts and then working them very quick. Don't leave it sitting for too long, especially once you've drawn it out. Start creating your shape. The drying retarder will help keep it working for longer, but it won't clear, mistakes won't be cleared away for a great length of time. So work small areas, get it the way you want it, and move on. And you can see here it's starting to also add a bit more lighting to the top edges of panels and such likes, and then drawing that lightening down into the darker areas to a degree, which is helping creating some nice depth for the modulated look that we're after. So you've got to work quick and work controlled with this approach. Now on to the weathering, and the first thing I'm going to do, and you've got to give this a day to dry, is I'm going to add some of this Vallejo paste to the very slab-sided lower hulls of the Calliopes and the jumbos. These areas don't take washes well because they're so smooth. This way we're going to create a surface, so when we start to apply our wash, our weathering wash, we've actually got some kind of texture, some kind of visible texture. Now once again I'm using one of these acrylic pin washes for this purpose. I'm going to apply it quite liberally on the lower hull here, and then I'm going to remove some of it after about 10 minutes so it doesn't look quite so vibrant. I'm going to put it around the hull, put it in the areas where dust would settle. This is the dust product. Putting it around edges of panels. You can see me just dotting it on, and then I'm going to start working what I've applied, thinning it out a bit, and then drawing it down in a way similar to what I did with the fading. And here we're creating a weathered patina on top of what we've already done. It's another semi-opaque layer, which is going to add greater depth to the hull and increase the dark to light transition. And then for the tracks I've got some pigment, any kind of dark pigment will do. I've got Umbro there, or MIG as I'm using. Now keep this thin folks, you thin it with water, that's the best plan. Just drop your water in as required. You see that that's not thick at all. I want to be able to move this around. You might think you're not putting a lot on, but believe me, you will be. There's a lot of pigment in that little bit of water on the brush there. So take it to the tracks, apply it liberally but carefully. You don't want to drown it. You can remove some, and we will be going to do that. Now here I'm not putting it on the wheels or the tyres, I just want it to be on the track because I want a difference. I want them to be distinctive. At this scale you want to keep your shape as opposed to just do the whole thing in one colour. It might be more accurate, but you know, you'll miss that definition between all those different areas. You have to let the pigment dry once you've got it on, and then you know what the finished look is. Here I am just working the track where there's too much, but I'm also looking for areas where there's too little, and as required adding some more in. And once the pigment is dry, you are ready to give it a coat of matte varnish all over. That will seal the pigment as well as just tone everything down. It'll be quite matte already. But there you go folks. Crammed quite a lot in to quite a short time, but hopefully that's a nice comprehensive guide for you and something for you to aim for yourselves. Let's go over now and have a look at some stills of the finished product so you can maybe see how it all comes together in the end.